Department of Social Services, and court judges. And we usually do this by way of our school justice partnership, as well as our juvenile justice partnership, for which CMS is a part. Then the information is sent to the review committee, which is comprised mainly of CMS staff and legal. And then once each and every rule is reviewed, we go rule by rule to look at every single rule and look at the recommendations that were given. And then that information is sent to executive cabinet for final approval. So the reason we're before you today is because one of the recommendations was that we take a look at making sure our regulations are in alignment with our policy. So looking at short-term suspensions and bringing back that appeal process. So the process would include the opportunity for parents to appeal an out-of-school suspension that's levied to a student. If the out-of-school suspension is given by the assistant principal or the dean, then the parent would have the opportunity to submit in writing to the principal a rationale as to why they feel that that suspension is not warranted or it's unfair. If it's the principal who actually initiates the suspension, then the parent has the opportunity to appeal again in writing to the learning community superintendent. The reviewer, whether it's the principal or the learning community superintendent, will have 3 days to review the parent's submission and then render their decision based on the information that they have received. The reason why we're here today is to talk to you about, it would be 3-day suspensions or higher that we would be looking to review. So the final point of appeal is going to lie with the learning community superintendent, and all decisions made by the learning community superintendent will be the final decision. Keeping in mind that if a student is given an out-of-school suspension, that out-of-school suspension will remain in effect throughout the appeal process.
Madam Chair?
Okay,
Madam Chair?
yes.
We need a minute. We are we're streaming live on YouTube. We're not streaming live on our Facebook channel as advertised. So I believe if I put a note and a link to the YouTube link, will that be sufficient? Okay. We're good, Madam Chair. Thank you.
We're good?
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
All right,
All right, so a location where this is currently being done is in Fayetteville, North Carolina, with Cumberland County. They brought back their review of their short-term suspension procedures, and they've seen a decrease in suspensions over the last 2 years.
will you repeat that?
So a group that, I was giving you a reference of someone who has brought back their review of the short-term suspension procedures in the process, and that's in Cumberland County, which is in Fayetteville, North Carolina. They brought back their process for review and short-term suspensions, and with that, they've seen a decrease in suspensions in the last 2 school years. So very similar to what we do now with our K-2 suspensions. If you recall that in 15-16, we had a little over 2,000 out-of-school suspensions with our K-2 students. And then we saw a decrease in 16 and 17, but in 17 and 18, you see that our out-of-school suspensions it dropped to 119. In 18-19, again, we had another decrease of 109. And then, of course, in 19-20, due to COVID, it was currently 43 out-of-school suspensions for K-2 students. So what this will do is it will allow us to be more accountable for our suspensions. We will look at more interventions for our students versus out-of-school suspension. And it'll give students an opportunity to be in the classroom and have more time with their teachers. So at this time, I will turn it over to Ms. Melissa Wood to discuss the revised copy of the policy.
Good morning. I did want to just add a bit to what Dr. Barnes was saying. This is the superintendent's recommendation based on feedback that he received, not only from what Dr. Barnes presented, but as you may know, the superintendent met with a group of students throughout the year to discuss equity issues. There was also input from the board-created equity committee from members of the community. And what the superintendent is seeking with the revision of this policy is more equity, more accountability across the school. Because what has been discovered, not only from Dr. Barnes' department, but also in the superintendent's review, is that there is an inequity across the CMS school zones on how short-term suspensions are being implemented for certain offenses and for certain students. And he felt that this policy would be a step towards equalizing that process, in that it would provide more accountability to the schools. And it speaks more to students having equitable processes for short-term suspension. So the policy revision, and I'm sorry, I actually cannot see that at all. So Charles, is this, excuse me, Mr. Jeter, is this the first page of the document? Okay, thank you very much.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. So the review that you have before you right now also included input.
Ms. Woods,
Yes,
that's not the right document up there.
yes, it's not. I see
The right
that.
document is before y'all. That's an old document. The right document, you have a copy of it, correct, Ms. Woods?
I do, yeah.
I gave her a copy. She's got a copy. The members of the committee, the document I handed to you this morning, which was 3 pages, that is the correct version. The difference is the suggestions that Dr. Jones made last week.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I'll email it to you right now. Yeah, we can take care of that.
Dr. Jones, did you just want me to wait until we get that up on the screen?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you.
It shouldn't take long at all.
Did you get it, Nicole? And for those that are listening at home, the correct version is attached in board docs. Nicole does it. Yes, I've emailed it to her. I apologize, Madam Chair.
It shouldn't take long.
She said he's gonna do it.
Are we ready?
Nicole said that he's gonna do it remotely from down home.
Okay.
They're trying to put
Nicole,
this on the screen.
are we ready?
He's getting it up right now.
Okay.
Madam Chair, it is posted online in both the YouTube comments and the Facebook comments for the public to see. All of us have a copy.
So we can go ahead.
I mean, I think we can go ahead and
Yeah,
conduct
just-
business.
I
Everyone has
think
the
that's
ability to
good.
access it, whether at home or here.
I believe that's a good idea. Okay.
Thank you. So the language in the document that you have before you that begins with JKD, Roman numeral 3, short-term suspension, this language is taken directly from the statute 115C-390.6E. And that provides that while the student is not entitled to appeal a short-term suspension by the principal, that the board in its discretion may provide the student an opportunity to review as permitted by this section. So the student will have the opportunity under this policy to seek a review of a short-term suspension upon request of the parent. Any short-term suspension that is 3 days or more, so that will be 3 to 10 days, that will be reviewed by the principal if it's imposed by an assistant principal or dean of students. That's not listed here because dean of student, obviously, that had the certification, only those would be allowed to impose suspensions on behalf of, as a designee of the principal. But
Before
it-
we, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. That'll be reviewed by the principal, and then if the principal upholds the decision, or if it's the principal who institutes the short-term suspension, then the learning community superintendent will have the opportunity to review that decision. The decision of the learning community superintendent will in fact be final, and there will be no further appeal or review to the superintendent or the board. And then the guidelines of how that would work are set out in the regulation. So I'll just stop right there in case the panel has any question or comment.
Are there, yes,
Yeah, well, one is, I just want to express my alarm that despite the regulation, which is the rules that staff is to be governed by, say that there is a review process. The regulation was last revised in 2003 and calls for parental review, yet staff quit doing it in 2004. So I find that alarming in a lack of compliance with policy and regulation. So having said that, it doesn't do us any good to change policy and regulation if it's not being followed by staff. So that's just a little comment there. So are we ready to dive into the policy itself now?
I think Ms. Shipp.
Ms. Shipp?
Yeah, I have a comment to make, because I will say, I was a principal during this entire process, and I did not miss doing this. So I think it may have been some miscommunication across the district, which has been said, as to how we work through suspensions based on referrals. Because I was definitely a principal who actually followed this. A student always had a right to come in, speak with me. We talked about it. Parents were notified before the child was suspended, and a letter was sent with that. So I followed these steps. The student always needs to have an opportunity to discuss the referral that's going to lead to a suspension. So I did not stop this practice. So I don't know if it was across the district, we were not consistent as administrators, but from what I know, having been there, I did follow this process to the letter as far as making sure there was never a suspension where the child, the parent, or family did not know it was happening, and I followed process in sending information home with the child or in making sure the parent knew ahead of time.
Yes, ma'am, if I may just address that, this is somewhat different, I think, than what you're describing. There are procedures for short-term suspension that are laid out in the policy and regulation that speak to notice, just what you referred to, giving the student, as long as it's safe in that situation, the opportunity to tell their side of the story, making sure that the student understands what code of conduct violation they are being accused of or sanctioned for, and then notice to the parent. That is laid out in board policy and statute. That is different than what is being proposed here. What's being proposed here is once that decision is made, that there be a review. So if the student or the parent feels that the sanction that they received was either unwarranted, was inequitable based on felt like the student was receiving a punishment that was different or more severe than either other students or what they felt was appropriate for that student's action and that student's history with the school, that the parent would then have the opportunity to go in and say, I want this to be reconsidered for review. I want the opportunity to say that my child doesn't deserve this punishment, as opposed to just saying, nope, the decision has been made and that's it.
They did. I actually did that too. I'm reading this and going, the parent was told they had the right to appeal to my, at that time, area superintendent, zone superintendent, whomever. So I'm reading this and thinking, I did follow that kind of process, and that process was in place in buildings. I can't say across the district. So this is, and it may be what you're saying is different, but I did allow the parent to come in. It actually was in one of the handbooks. There was an appeals, a list of appeals form. They could appeal to my learning community suit. If the assistant principal did the suspension, they could appeal to the principal. And this was a process that we followed at one point.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Mr. Strain, I think you had a comment to make.
I didn't know that I did, but
Oh,
I
okay.
can. Yeah, I can. Sure, I'll take the opportunity to do that. I mean, I approach this policy committee work really from a perspective of thinking every time we crack open the policy book, what problem are we trying to solve? What opportunity are we trying to realize here, right? And so I think going back that, both Ms. Sawyer's remarks in terms of, well, the regulation is relatively clear, and it sounds like there might be some inconsistency. Mm-hmm. Some places it's implemented with fidelity, others perhaps not. Those issues shouldn't come to the policy committee. So if that's where we are, in that the policy and the regulation says one thing, and it's not being implemented with fidelity, that's a different issue than let's go change the policy.
Right.
So I want to understand what problem we're trying to solve.
Madam Chair, if I could help answer that question.
Please.
Under your current policy, JKD, this board has not authorized a appeal of a short-term suspension. That is not provided for in the current policy. However, it is provided for in the current regulation. That regulation, by your own rules, cannot be in conflict of the policy. In this case, it is, and apparently has been, since long before I became the policy administrator for CMS. So the issue here is you've got a regulation that is not compliant with policy. Policy always trumps, pardon the pun, regulation.
Right.
And so once that problem was identified, then the question becomes, what is the will of the district, the board? The superintendent would like the regulation process to remain in place. Whether or not it's being adhered to is, I agree with you, Mr. Strain, a separate operational question, not a policy committee question. But right now, what it says in regulation cannot happen based on y'all's policy, because y'all have not provided that opportunity as you're required to do under the state statute, which I provided a copy of each one of y'all to. So the question is, before this policy committee is, do you want to provide an appellate process for short-term suspensions as provided by law? If you do, how do you want to do that?
Clarity is the word that I,
And so you have a conflict between your policy and your regulation. What your superintendent is recommending is that what is in regulation be allowed by a policy change, if you will.
succinctly put, it definitely needs
That's my forte,
clarity.
Madam Chair.
Yes,
Short and succinct.
yes.
I'm comfortable with parts of the changes, but I don't think it goes far enough in providing true equity measures. The key to me is that the words "upon request of the parent" are included in the review procedure. And I think if we are really striving for equity, we would be reviewing all short-term suspensions, not just those by empowered parents who know they can appeal. And,
I'm sorry, I apologize.
okay, and furthermore, I think that we need to add language to the policy that states that out-of-school suspensions are to be a last resort disciplinary measure after other documented interventions have been exhausted. And that documentation must be presented along with the request for the suspension. I've seen too many cases of suspensions and hearings where I've asked what has been tried, what are the interventions have been used, and I hear crickets. Or maybe the student talked to a counselor, but zero documentation and no true efforts to document that. So I would like to see all suspensions reviewed by either the principal or area sup, and that review should include other documented interventions that have been tried.
Ms. Sawyer, if I could ask
And
for,
Ms. Mays is waving her hand up there.
Ms. Mays, if you could come to the mic so the people at home can hear you.
I just have a question. So you saying no matter what the misconduct, there has to be other interventions?
Well, this is in regard to short-term suspensions, so a weapons violation wouldn't even fall in this category. Is that what you mean?
I just wanted clarity, no matter what the misconduct, for the short-term suspension.
Yes.
And
So I guess if I could, before Ms. Shipp asks a substantive question, just ask a clarifying question so I can make sure I document exactly what Ms. Sawyer's trying to get to. Per statute, the principal is the only one who can functionally issue the short-term suspension. So I guess arguably, I'm not sure the principal can review its own
Right, so if
decision. Are you suggesting, and maybe I'm piggybacking on what Ms. Mays is saying, that all short-term suspensions would be automatically appealed to the learning community superintendent?
Well, how would it be, I mean, I'm just taking
I'm not
the-
making a value judgment one
Yeah,
way or the
no,
other. I'm just trying to
I'm
understand.
just trying to, yes. So I'm trying to remove the "at the request of the parent" language out of that equation because I think it sets up an inequity.
So what is your catalyst? Is your catalyst then all of them, or is there
Any 3 to 10 days.
so any short-term suspension that
Suspension.
exceeds 3 days, because that automatically caps at 10 days by statute, would be automatically reviewed? Is that your request?
Yes, and that review would include documentation of other disciplinary interventions.
And to that point, before I go to
Okay,
you,
go
to piggyback on what Ms. Sawyer has said, I did have, upon request of the parent, that means empowered parents. And oftentimes, the students that are suspended don't have that base of empowerment. So I had a big question mark there. And I think Ms. Sawyer spoke to how we can probably get around that. And you said 3 days or more. 3 days, 3 to 10 days. Let's, for clarity's sake.
Well, Madam Chair, a short-term suspension is already capped at 10 days. so
I know,
anything-
but if we
It's
want it in our
policy.
policy to say that.
Okay.
Dr. Jones, the title of the policy is short-term suspension.
It is, but there in that sentence 17,
We can
3
certainly-
days or more,
No problem in being redundant, that's fine.
so that we have the repetition of that. Okay, yes. Mays.
I'm hearing is that, so you are, the policy committee is now not considering an appeal process
Right,
by the parents, which is,
right.
but more of a review process before the suspension is imposed, which is similar to what the board did for the elementary system. Those are two very different things. A parent and student, as part of their review process, have the right to appeal a decision. The board has the right, obviously, to say, per the law, that these short-term suspensions, which are under the law.
Could you move to a microphone so that people can,
Of the principal, the board can, and that is what you're considering, creating an appeal process. And that's what staff is proposing, an appeal process. But what you are now discussing, and I want you guys to be very clear, is a review process before a suspension is ever imposed. And hence to my question, regardless of the conduct as well. So those are two very different things. So the student will not be suspended until the review happens.
Okay,
I think here, when you say upon the request of the parent, and then you're saying a review should take place, what I will say is, then that's taken away from the principal. What needs to be in place is that a referral has been written that leads to a decision to be made from that consequence of the student's action. Is this going to be a suspension? So if it is in place for interventions, once that referral comes to the office, the administration looks at, which is what Ms. Sawyer is saying, what are the interventions that have been in place that we have used prior to making a decision to suspend? So in essence, I would say, and I know I followed that, I did a review pretty much before making a decision to suspend. So once the decision to suspend, if we're saying to the parent, they can now say they want to appeal that, I have no problem with that. But to say that even without them requesting it, I think that's what we're saying, they would automatically get an appeal. I think then you're saying, like you're saying.
That's a review.
Right, that the review hadn't taken place. But in essence, if you're following practice, I'm not even gonna say what to follow, practice, as we look at these issues of discipline and not being punitive, but actually trying to follow through on a referral for inappropriate behavior, looking at the handbook, then we follow those steps to review what has happened and what consequence will be given. it may not need to be a suspension. But if it is going to be a suspension, it should be based on the review that has been done. So only if the parent is in disagreement with the principal's now review and decision, then upon request of the parent has the right to then appeal my decision because they're not happy with it. But I have gone through a review prior to making that suspension.
Absolutely. And if I could say two things. One, back to the original, how did we get here? We have been looking at discipline data as a staff for many, many years. And in that review, to get to root cause, what we noticed were the gaps and inconsistencies across the district with how certain schools were adhering to practice and not. And so the question became, well, what does the policy say? Which is when we discovered the policy and the reg did not align and that the policy was mute, which is how we got to, we need to make sure that the policy and the reg align. To the point around the voice of the parent, I want to put this in the room because in the process of reviewing this and asking for feedback, families actually said they want to have voice. And so I think it's very important in this process to make sure that they're clear that that is their option, but that we give them the opportunity to appeal, and that we consider every parent having that ability and opportunity to do that. I wouldn't want to be placed in the position where we are making a decision on behalf of a parent without empowering them to make it for their children and their families.
I see it as a both and, that I think we need to, in policy, be explicit about what our expectations are for review. And thank you, Ms. Mays, for clarifying that. I think it really is important to distinguish the review from the appeal, and I've gotten that.
Yes, ma'am, and that's all I really wanted to know.
But I think we need to explicitly state that there needs to be a review that examines documented prior interventions before an a short-term out-of-school suspension is implemented, and allow parents to appeal. So I think it's a both and, but I really feel strongly that we need to be explicit that their documentation of prior interventions needs to, a justification for the out-of-school suspension needs to be reviewed by the next up the chain before that suspension is implemented.
And I think the spirit of that is absolutely something that has to happen in terms of making sure that our school leaders are accountable for the kinds of consequences that they give, and absolutely making sure that their direct supervisors and their direct supervisors are aware, and they would absolutely have to have documentation. And so I do think this is a step in the right direction to make sure that we are paying attention and focusing to those things that perhaps we haven't in the past.
And I'll just say, we had to turn that information in. You know, every time we made a decision to suspend, I don't know if you know, that was sent into the learning communities, now learning community SUPs now. They knew ahead of time. They knew that day. We sent in a report saying, I am making a suspension of a student, whether it was 3 days or however many days. That went in. I reported that to the superintendent, my learning community SUP. So he knew or she knew ahead of time that that was happening. So those provided checks and balances. The question is, are we following those checks and balances that we had practiced or put in place, I believe, in the schools to ensure that there was equity? I think it's
Strain.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think there are a couple of words being used here that may or may not apply. Equity has been used quite a bit, and with all of the work that we do around equity, I think we're actually talking about equality here, and consistency and fidelity of the implementation of our code of conduct. I can't support reviewing every decision that is made in this district. That is off the charts. I mean, it's unbelievable. What we have to do is we have to empower our leaders both our principals at the school level and their staff to make decisions. And then we need to hold them to account. And our staff, what they need to do, this isn't a board work, but it's certainly the superintendent and cabinet's work, is make sure that those are implemented. Our policies and the superintendent's own regulations are implemented consistently and with fidelity. That's our expectation, and we shouldn't shy away from that one iota. If there are inconsistencies, then those need to be addressed. And people need to be held to account. That's the culture of accountability we talk about, and applies in this, of all, in this area, right? So I certainly will not support a review of every decision that's made. That's
And you're
crazy.
saying to the to the learning community soups, is that what you mean, for clarity?
No, it starts with the first letters here in 3D, right? Are we talking about an appeal or a review process? The language has been changed to review procedures, even though it still says upon request of the parent. So there's an inconsistency here, and it's coming up in this conversation. Are we talking about a mandatory review process, which I certainly won't support? Or are we talking about consistently implementing an appeals process such that short-term suspensions can be appealed by the parent, and it should say parent or caregiver? And I would certainly support that, because parents and caregivers still have responsibility for their children. They need to engage. If they don't believe that the punishment fits the disciplinary decision fits the conduct and behavior, then by all means engage and ask the question. And what we need to do is we need to make sure that we are providing for that. Now, while I've got the floor, a couple questions. If I start at the top and read through this, there has been and continues to be a statement in here: a student may petition the board for an appeal only as otherwise provided by North Carolina law. Because this is in short-term suspension, I'm not sure why that sentence needs to be in our policy, because there is nothing in here for a short-term suspension that gets appealed to the board. And so I'm not sure that
I'm sorry, Ms. Strain, what sentence are you referring to?
a student may petition, in the first paragraph, a student may petition the board for an appeal only as otherwise provided by North Carolina law. Well, we're saying only as otherwise provided by North Carolina law says that, and we're saying in here that short-term suspensions aren't appealable to the board. So I'm not sure the value of that sentence. In the next paragraph, I've mentioned the fact that we call out parent, and I think we need to be consistent with other policies, and certainly what we know to be the case is that it's parents and caregivers, right?
Before you go on,
Yes, ma'am.
I want you to continue, but in regards to lines 11 and 12, that has to do with the general statutes. You were questioning that? I'm trying to make sure.
So there's two sentences there. There's one that talks about and references the general statute. And then there's a secondary statement there that says, a student may petition the board for an appeal only as otherwise provided by North Carolina law. Well, this is short-term suspensions, and we go on to say these appeals don't go to the board. So as long as we're in the area of short-term suspensions, I don't know why we're talking about petitions to the board.
You speak
Because
to
there aren't
that,
petitions to the
Ms.
board.
Woods.
It
Right.
never was.
Yes,
It never
yes,
was.
Madam Chair. That language was in the policy prior to this markup that I provided, and I was keeping the policy consistent with what the board had already approved. I don't necessarily disagree with Mr. Strain. I think my assumption, and apologize for assuming, that the board left that in when you revised JKD back in 217, so it would be clear to anyone who read it that the student doesn't have an appeal or petition to the board beyond what is laid out in the current policy. But if you are referencing 390.6, which Mr. Strain is correct, speaks specifically to short-term suspension, that is true that there is no appeal except as provided by the board. But,
Yeah, and I think, if I may, the additional language that we are considering putting in here covers that, right? Because it makes that statement then redundant, because then we further define exactly what the process is. Before, that language wasn't there. Now, with this new language that's being proposed, we clearly state, this is the process, and it ends at the learning community superintendent and goes no further. So I just think that statement is redundant at that point.
Ms. Dashiell?
Very basic. I just have a very basic, simple question for myself and for all of us and for the viewing public. Can we talk about what the difference is between a review and an appeal and a petition? How is a review different from an appeal and a petition?
and I think that the concern that Mr. Strain raised, and perhaps Ms. Schiff, about having a process where every suspension is automatically reviewed, I understand that concern. However, the statute says that the board, in its discretion, may provide students an opportunity for review or appeal of the short-term suspension. Ms. Dashiell, I read that to say, to understand that the board has the right or opportunity to say, okay, you can appeal your short-term suspension, or it can be reviewed by, in whatever way that we set up. And the way that I was reading it, and obviously, reasonable minds will disagree, that a review is just that. It's a look at the process, see if the process was followed, see if the decision made sense, and if it did, then that means that it was a valid decision, as opposed to an appeal, which implies additional due process rights for a student to perhaps bring in other evidence, to bring in witnesses, to have some sort of more formalized hearing. And so since the statute did provide for a review process, the superintendent and his staff felt that the language of review procedures made more sense, because they're not offering a student like an appeal to the board where you would set a hearing, you could come in and call witnesses, that there would be closed session, but it would be your opportunity to have the decision reviewed to say, is this consistent with policy, regulations, student code of conduct, the practices of the school, what other students are receiving for the same violation in the school and across the district. And if so, then that means that if the answer to all those things are yes, then the student's suspension should be upheld. If upon that review it's determined that it hasn't been, that there wasn't interventions put in place as set out by the student code of conduct or the practice of the school, or that the student didn't get an opportunity to be heard, or that all the evidence wasn't collected before, then the principal or the superintendent would have the right to say, this is inconsistent upon my review, and this suspension needs to be, something else needs to happen.
Madam Chair, a couple quick items. In the statute, 115C 390.6A, the student already has a right by statute to an informal hearing with the principal unless the student presents a direct and immediate threat to the safety of other students. So there's already an informal hearing that is provided, which in my vernacular would almost be a review. that is provided by statute that these students have a right to. I would also ask the committee to look at line 17. I know I'm starting, shall be reviewed by the principal if imposed by the assistant principal. Once again, I don't believe an assistant principal can impose a suspension, short-term suspension under the statute. So they can?
Yes, they can.
Yes, that became.
Designee, his or her
Excuse me.
designee, which, under our policies, the assistant principal is a designee of.
Speak
the
up, please.
principal. I said, under our policies, the principal is a designee of the principal. So an assistant principal may, as well as in some instances, a dean of student may. And so that's really, so we're compliant
So-
with that. The distinction is, again, that the review of an assistant principal or a dean goes to the principal. And so the way our policy is currently written, even though the regulation says that, that's consistent with state law, because it's still the final decision of the principal. And the board, up to this point, has not approved a procedure for review by the principal. And that's what you're considering
So,
today.
Ms. Mays, would it be accurate to say that currently, as it exists, a principal designee may implement a short-term suspension, but that suspension, in theory, is appealable to the principal as currently exists?
So here's how I see the words appeal and review. It all has to do with timing. And so review and appeal are synonymous to me if it occurs after a decision. If it occurs before a decision, it's a review, because you really don't have anything to appeal at that point. The board, when you amended this policy back in 2017 regarding the short-term suspension for pre-K through second grade, intentionally said that that would be a review. So the suspensions themselves could not be imposed until those decisions were reviewed by the superintendent. Here, what the superintendent is asking is that even once the decision is made by a principal, a short-term suspension, that that an appeal be allowed for that decision to be reviewed by the learning community superintendent. So it's after the fact. So if you think of it in those terms and not get caught up on the words themselves, then I think that may help in terms of your discussions.
Which leads to my second question then, for clarity's sake, Madam Chair, to Ms. Mays. Please don't go anywhere, unless you want. As I understand the current verbiage of this, once again, looking at lines 16 through 18, upon request of the parent, short-term suspension or more shall be reviewed by the principal if opposed by the assistant principal or the learning community superintendent if upheld or imposed. Okay, so if upheld would include the initial decision as well by the assistant principal?
Yes.
Perfect. I did. Just want to make sure.
Okay, so if we can move on, we'll be here all day. I think we've had a
Dr.
lot
Jones,
of
I'm sorry, may I just
explanation.
address
Yes.
Mr. Strain's other point about the language of parent?
Okay,
And Mr. Strain, obviously, we could put that here, but the reason that we left it is because in the definition of parent, in the policy, it includes caregivers, guardians, so that would be covered under the language parent, just because that's in the definition of our policy. So we could certainly include it, but
No,
it
as long as
includes
we're
it.
consistent. I think there's some places in our policy book, and I know we have this conversation often,
Yes,
but I think there's some places where we've included parent, guardian, caregiver.
we do.
And other places, we've just referenced parent. So as long as we're consistent. Madam Chair, may I finish my remarks?
You
have here?
you may.
Thank you.
You will.
So I was in that paragraph, starting on line 17, on that point regarding caregiver. The next comment was, and I'm no English major, but I think there's a couple of commas that need to go into that first sentence, if imposed by the assistant principal. I think this discussion has suggested that the language, if imposed by the assistant principal, we may want to amend to if imposed by designated school staff, because it's not just the assistant principal.
That's a good thing.
Because, for example, deans. And then at the end of that paragraph, the sentence is, detailed guidelines are set forth in JKDR. I don't know that we have that line in every one of our policies. I think just the regulations have the detailed guidelines. And so I would propose we strike that final sentence, because that's true for all regulations that exist, that there's details to the policies. So again, I think that particular piece is redundant. If I could draw your attention to lines 35 and 36. The notion that we reduce out-of-school suspensions, I, of course, agree with, but that's not the goal. I think the goal is to improve the learning environment. And the way that we improve the learning environment is by ensuring that there is a culture within the school building that encourages conduct within the guidelines of our codes and code of conduct. When you vary from the code of conduct in terms of the behavior and conduct of students, then there have to be consequences. And what we're trying to do is make sure that it's a sound learning environment, the best learning environment we can create for every one of our students. One of the reasons that I am vehemently opposed to making this all a review rather than appeals and reviews, which is where I think the title of this needs to go, review and appeal procedures, is because those consequences, even for short-term suspensions, are there in order to maintain the discipline and the conduct and the learning environment itself. And it's unfortunate for the individual who has frankly created this scenario, albeit a student, a child, who's overstepped those bounds of the conduct guidelines. But it's important for the rest of the students in the classroom, in the school building, that we are able to do that. And so if you have it be a review process, then there's no immediate consequence. And again, I'm no psychiatrist or psychologist, but those need to be imposed directly in order to facilitate the learning environment itself for the rest of the students. If I'm thinking about a classroom of 24 students and there is a review process that takes 4 days, then coming back to that child 4 days later and saying, well, we've done the review process and now we're going to impose a short-term suspension, that makes no sense to me. So my point about 35 and 36 is that I think the school improvement plan should be focused on continuing to maintain and improve the learning environment. I'm not sure, frankly, about the goal, a measurable goal to reduce out-of-school suspensions, because that's a it's a tool that's necessary.
Madam
And
Chair,
so
may I
I'm a
offer
little concerned
some
about that.
verbiage for you, Mr. Strain, that might,
Now, I want to finish my thoughts, if I could. I keep getting interrupted, so, if I continue on to the second page, it talks about the logs being reviewed quarterly by the.
Let's go page by page, and I'll come back to you, Mr. Strain. Because you,
Okay, so I
Okay,
want to
we'll
put
get-
just a couple more points. Like-
around the first through line 39.
Yeah,
And
okay.
then we go-
You know, broadly speaking, as many of you have heard me say so many times before, if we're looking at policies, I'm thinking about the level of effort required to implement and operate, whatever changes we make, what's that change? Are there any financial implications? How does this fit with the laws and regulations? And most critically, how does it impact student performance in the learning environment? And so student performance in the learning environment, not only for the individual in this place, in this case, that has unfortunately pushed the boundaries of our student code of conduct, but critically for the rest of the kids in the class and the school. With that,
I
I'll
think
yield.
you were next, and then,
So I think Mr. Strain's right on the title D. It should be review and appeals procedures are both included in this description. One, in one section, we call it review with K2, and in the other, we call it appeals, so we might as well make it clear. With regard to lines 35 and 36, I think we need to actually add some language to that. I think it's important to use the school improvement plan as a tool, but I think it needs to be clear in what our expectation is. And so I would suggest that it say, the board directs every school to articulate in its school improvement plan a clear and measurable goal to reduce the number and disproportionality of out-of-school suspensions. Because I think that disproportionality is one of the key reasons we're having this discussion, is that we have massive disproportionality in our suspensions, and I think that needs to be called out. It's not simply about reducing numbers, it's about reducing disproportionality. So I would offer that language for lines 35 and 36. And, I understand Mr. Strain's concern about just saying the number, and frankly, if that is the key sticking point, I would be comfortable saying the board directs every school to articulate in its school improvement plan a clear and measurable goal to reduce the disproportionality of out-of-school suspensions. If the concern is just
I have some
focusing-
language on that when the committee is ready to hear it, that might
okay,
work.
after.
That is a goal that should be in the school improvement plan. I will say that in terms of the disproportionalities and the number of suspensions. That was a goal that should be in the school improvement plan in that language. It also, I feel, should be school discipline plans, a process that would affect decreased referrals to eliminate the number of suspensions. Because now you're working on what you were saying, Mr. Strain, is the behavior and the consequence and the referrals that lead to suspension. You don't just get suspended, there's something going on that leads to the referral that then leads to a consequence. And is that consequence a suspension? So if we're trying to have schools to look at this, then the language needs to be, what are they doing? Again, we're looking at an intervention to help eliminate, then, if you want to say, the number of suspensions. What's the process? And in the school improvement plan, every school improvement plan has a safety part that they have to address in the school improvement plan. And that should look at school discipline plans, using the student rights and responsibility handbook, consequences, and reducing those referrals that lead to suspensions, because we want to keep kids in school, not have them out of school. So every school improvement plan should be talking about how do we keep kids in school so that we can teach them. So that language, I mean, we can make that succinct, but I think that's the language you're trying to get to.
And to your point, I think 35 and 36, those two lines do that, and certainly 38 and 39 as well. You have
Madam Chair,
something
in
you
my
want to say?
ongoing effort to land the plane sometimes,
Yes.
I would like to recap what I believe are the go, no-go decisions before the committee as I've heard them thus far. We are 65 minutes in. Traditionally, we bucket an hour and a half, but I don't have, Big Brother doesn't start till 8, so I got plenty of time ahead of me if we need to go longer, so it's up to y'all. But in an effort to push this along, it seems like to me we have a question on renaming it from review procedures to appeal and review procedures to more accurately reflect. That seems to be a question before the committee, not asking y'all to decide right now. There is a question of the committee to change the verbiage in line 17 from assistant principal to designated school staff. Once again, not asking for a decision, just enumerating what the potential decision-making points could be. Line 19, there is a request to strike the sentence that says detailed guidelines, blah, 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 blah. Line 35 through 36, there is a request and discussion to alter that language. I will also say there's still the overarching global question of whether or not you want to make the change at all. And how, and then of course the secondary more global question is it an automatic appeal? Or is it, which I would define as Ms. Mays does, that the short-term suspension has been handed down and then someone is asking for a review of that process before that has been implemented, is how I understood the question. Once again, not making a value judgment, just trying to land a plane here. I believe those are the questions before the committee. As I've heard this discussion, there may be more, but we can do that. I will say, now going back to a substantive issue, I do have language in 3536 that may accomplish your goals. It may not, but I'll read it based on the comments I heard from all four of you. And I didn't write this, and if you didn't like it, it's not my fault. Every school shall articulate in its school improvement plan a clear and measurable goal to impose out-of-school suspensions in a fair and consistent process. Ultimately, I think that captures what Mr. Strain says and still says a goal which is a fair and consistent process which will be reduced. Once again, as I said, Ms. Sawyer, if you didn't like it, I didn't write it. I'm just offering up suggestions. But but those are the questions I think are before the committee. Dr. Barnes, unless you think I'm missing anything.
Well, I was going to ask for Ms. Shipp's writing, the information that she had. I was trying to write it down as you were talking, but I will get it from you after the fact if that will make it easy.
Are we talking about line 35, 36, Dr. Barnes?
That is correct.
Yeah, what did you say there, Ms.
Right,
Shipp?
I was saying each school should have in its school improvement plan a measurable goal for safety and supervision, which includes a school discipline plan and a process that would affect or decrease the referrals, eliminating the number of suspensions in the school.
Where are you talking?
Reducing the number of suspensions.
Yeah, reducing the number of suspensions and also using the student rights and responsibility handbook. This would be 35 and 36.
Yeah, Dr. Jones, she's suggesting replacing the words in 35, 36 with the statement that she just read.
And it would really maybe take care of 38 and 39 in some ways. I don't know, because the plan would include a log of behaviors. That would be part of your school discipline plan for consequences.
And I'm pretty comfortable with that, with the exception, I think we really need to use the words disproportionality in our description, because we need to name the problem we're trying to solve, which is racial disproportionality.
Yeah, and we could add.
Ms. Shipp, if you can write that down, how you want it, and, over the next
Put that
few
in
minutes.
there.
And throw in racial disproportionality.
Throw in whatever language, and we will, because obviously if we're gonna do that today, we have to encapsulate it.
But I need to hear it.
I agree, which is why I'm asking her to write it down, so we can have it enumerated and heard and voted on exactly verbatim.
Madam Chair, I just want to clarify where we're going. Is it possible that we could agree in principle on the things you
That's what I'm getting ready to
Okay.
start doing, yes, ma'am.
and then we vote finally on the policy after we see it in writing one last time? Because I would like to express my,
I serve at the will of the committee chair, so however she chooses to do it, we'll find, but
If
my
I'm hearing
recommendation.
correctly, we want all of the changes.
So the first
And
go-no
then-
decision then, Madam Chair, is frankly, does this committee want to make any changes to the policy whatsoever?
yes.
Yes.
So that is, Ms. Shipp,
Yes,
so I believe that would be a straw vote of 4-0. That's not an official vote, but we understand changes will be made. The second thing is, do we agree the title should be called Appeals Procedure, Reviews Procedure, or, and what I would recommend, is Appeals and Review Procedures?
Makes sense to me.
Is that acceptable to the committee?
Yes.
So then what we will do is assume, Dr. Barnes, is that acceptable to staff? So we will entitle the,
is it review before appeals or appeals before review? It should be review before appeal.
Appeals, review and appeal.
it's review
And
appeals. Thank you.
the word review first.
Think they're either both plural or both singular, one or the other.
The motion will be that we will fix the
That's what I
grammar,
had.
any grammatical
Review and
mistakes
appeal
that are
procedure.
non-substantive to the content. All right, so we have that. Do we agree in line 17?
Oh, Charlie, I think you meant that we had a question on lines 11 and 12 as well.
Okay.
Remove.
Okay.
Right.
What is the will of the committee on removing line 11? The sentence that starts on beginning on line 11 finishes on 12, which starts a student may. Ms. Sawyer,
I'm fine with that. It doesn't convey any particular meaning to me
Ms.
that,
Shipp,
I'm fine with
Mr.
removing.
Strain, obviously,
Yep.
Dr. Jones.
Done.
I agree. It's-
Okay.
All right, would staff like to comment on that? They do
The
not?
only, I would just like to point out, the only comment to that is that that was the language, just for the board's consideration, that the policy committee and the board had in the appeal for the second term, K through 2 suspensions. And so that, for whatever reason that the board or policy committee left that in, I just want you all to be aware that that language was there. And so if you're fine with taking it out altogether, it will impact all of that. Just
Understood.
wanted-
Thank you.
Okay.
Line 17, actually, the relevant piece is on line 18, which is, if imposed by the assistant principal, the suggestion is, if imposed by the designated school staff.
License. It doesn't need to be. a
I'm
word.
sorry, the language?
Well, the principal designee,
Okay, so if imposed by the principal designee is the verbiage?
Leader of the school. yeah.
principal's designee.
It has to be designated.
Principals designee.
And just while we're pausing here, Mr. Jeter, you were going through the requested changes. At the beginning of line 17, Ms. Sawyer did address the point of wanting to remove that language upon request of the parent.
We're going to come back to that.
Okay?
We're taking little rocks, and we'll get to the bigger issues at the end. Is Ms. Sawyer, Dr. Jones, Mr. Strain, Ms. Shipp, is everyone okay with principal's designee as a replacement in that language on line 18?
I'm just gonna ask the question, is it clear who the principal's designees are, can be? Because I think that's important. I know it was when I was,
Yes.
that who those designees can be, because it can't be any designee.
Right, the
that can-
principal has to make that decision based on the criteria of who is licensed to have that administrative
I think
power.
it says
Yes,
that.
ma'am.
The principals,
The next item I have, Madam Chair, is on line 19, which is a request to strike the sentence that says, I'm sorry, it's on line 21, that strikes the sentence that says detailed guidelines are set forth in JKDR.
Fine with me.
You're fine with that, Ms. Sawyer? Ms. Shipp?
That's fine.
Dr. Jones?
I mean,
Any comments from staff?
I don't have a problem with that in there.
But do you have do you want to discuss whether or not it should come in or out?
I mean,
Which, are we on line 21, 22?
I mean, what is the fast
Mr. Strain?
thinking that?
So the thinking was that, should we go to every one of our policies and put this line in them? Anything that has a regulation.
Regulation, okay, all right, you're right. It's understood they're okay, all right,
You good with that, Dr. Jones?
I'm good with it.
Okay. Moving on to line 35 and 36. We will get Ms. Shipp's language momentarily as she gets it written. Are there any other suggestions as we go through page 2, line 5? I will remind the committee, the item on page 2, lines 8 through 30 is technically outside your purview. It's here for illustrative reasons to see the corresponding changes, but that is a regulation that is not approvable by this committee. That doesn't mean you can't make recommendations, mind you, but that is, regulation, as we know, is at the superintendent's purview as long as it does not contradict policy.
Well, 30, I have a question. You've had the out-of-school suspension, and so an appeal is not, or
Are you on
review-
page 2, line 30, Dr. Jones?
Yes.
Okay.
So what I don't get, it seems to me to negate line 17. If they've already been suspended for 10 days. I mean, it's short in my thinking. I don't get line 30. Will you explain that? Elaborate.
I'm sorry, Dr. Jones, I didn't hear your full question.
The OSS line 30 shall not be postponed pending the outcome of the appeal. So, the child is already suspended. If it's 6 days, 5 days, they already suspended in that 5 days. Therefore, it makes the whole appeal moot.
Well, the appeal can certainly be, how it's listed in PowerSchool can be changed if the review determined, or the appeal process, however you decide to do the language, that the suspension wasn't appropriate, that will be changed, and PowerSchool no longer be listed as an out-of-school suspension, so it could be changed there. Additionally, we are not assuming that it will take the entire amount of time for the principal and/or the learning community superintendent to review or hear the student's appeal. I mean, that process could take 2 days, depending on the learning communities, it could take 1 day. So we are saying that the parent has 3 days to request it, but if the parent requested on the first day and it's done on the first day, then
It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. I have too much experience as a board member with parents who call me because it takes 3 to 4 days for the investigation and all of this, so, you know, that sounds ideal, but to me, I have real problems with 30. The OSS shall not be postponed pending the outcome of the appeal. I mean, if my child has already lost 10 days in school, the learning and everything else, so it's not gonna be in PowerSchool, whoopee. But the thing of it is, they've lost those days of learning. They've already been, served their time, been in, so to speak.
Well, that gets us back, Dr. Jones, to the point that Mr. Strang was making. If the review is that the suspension cannot occur until this review process or appeal process, well, as Ms. May said, it would be a review process then you're in the position of saying, okay, the student's conduct occurred on Monday, the review procedure is not completed until the next Tuesday, so the child stays in school that entire time, and then the next Tuesday, they come to the principal and they're told, okay, now you get a 5-day suspension for something that happened 6 days ago. And I thought that Mr. Strain and both Ms. Shipp had indicated that they did not think, that they did not agree with putting the suspension on hold during the review process.
Well,
I mean, that's just the,
During the appeal process, as it were.
Okay, so this to me speaks to the point that it's not worthwhile for the parent to even seek to have a review or appeal. Am I missing something here?
So this is no different than the reassignment process where when a student gets reassigned, they still get to appeal it, and until it's heard by you, then is when it's overturned. So yes, the case would be that the student would be suspended until it's reviewed and some other decision has been made. So in the meantime, we do have short-term suspension sites for students to attend.
So in the meantime, what? I didn't hear after that.
We do still have the short-term suspension sites for students to be able to attend. Students would be given the opportunity, if in fact we found that the suspension should not have taken place, they would be able to do recovery. But those would be the things that we would be able to offer if in fact a student lost so many days.
And I was gonna say, that is true what you're saying, Dr. Jones, is that when a parent did appeal, and it's just a 3-day suspension, you're exactly right. The suspension is taking place. The parent is trying to appeal at the same time. Usually that suspension has already took place. One of the things that we looked at was clearing that student's name in terms of the suspension, that the suspension is no longer on record.
And we still have, and as you just stated, we still have the expungement process in place. That has not changed.
Okay.
The expungement process is still in
And
place.
that's important.
Well, to go back to what we said, though, they have been denied their learning environment. And so,
Dr. Jones?
yes,
That gets back to the question I raised about prior review. Instead of saying that you're going to rely on parents to appeal, that you would have a prior review. In other words, eliminate the unilateral, unsupervised ability of a staff member to suspend without having another set of eyes and documentation on the issue. That's the only way to get around this problem of having.
But then what you're saying, Ms. Sawyer, is this. Then you're saying the principal should have, all of this should have been in place. So when the decision is made, it's my discretion, I feel like I'm doing the right thing, I'm just gonna say it that way, and I've made that decision to suspend. I'm feeling like that's the right decision based on my review that I should have done, all the information I've gathered. And so if you feel that it shouldn't stand, then you're going to my learning community suit to appeal that. So And if it's a situation where the child was causing harm, or a situation where the child needed to go ahead and get that suspension, which is what you're saying, because we're gonna wait 4 days to go through this appeals, but the child needs to be removed because of the type of suspension you feel is warranted, I think we have to look at all those pieces that come together. So, you know, it's a hard situation, because then that parent can appeal to the learning community suit. But I'm saying I need to go ahead and follow through on that suspension.
Yeah.
I have done the review.
But what I'm saying is, we could hypothetically set up a parallel system to the K-2 system.
Oh, I see.
That would, to me, would be the prior review thing. Now, whether that becomes excessively burdensome on staff,
But, you know, we had, yeah.
but that's, I mean, that's one option. And to maintain the parental appeal, but basically do a version of the K-2 thing that says not to the superintendent, but to the area superintendent.
Well, I had to
And-
turn in a report, which is
and-
what you're saying.
Yeah, so, and that would be a true review, a prior to suspension, it would need to be approved.
Well,
That's what I'm setting up trying to kind of do a decision tree here.
and let me ask, so we still doing it where the learning community suits have to get a copy of the suspension? It goes to the community suits office once a suspension is made? I know that was a step to send that. That's like your data. You had to put it in PowerSchool that you made that suspension, and also send that record to your learning community suits office, so they actually knew a suspension had been done. I mean, that was a.
Can I just,
Well, quickly,
Finish.
because he,
I didn't get
Mr.
to
Strain has
finish.
been.
I know, but
Okay, go ahead.
so you can do the prior review, but the other thing I wanted to raise is parental notification of the ability to appeal. That doesn't seem to appear in the regulation saying how that and when that would be delivered, and it's also not addressed in the policy. And it
Can you
need-
repeat that, Ms. Sawyer?
there is no, neither in the regulation or in the policy, is there any spelling out of how parental notification of their right to appeal would be delivered? And it seems to me we need to spell that out so that, you know, the principal doesn't wait a week and then send the letter that says, oh, by the way, you can appeal.
Is it still
Yeah,
in the
so we,
handbook?
we have notice letters for short-term suspensions, that is sent with the student, emailed or sent home in a letter. So that notification, and we modify those as necessary, to be consistent with not only policy, regulations, but other things that are happening in the district. So that notification would go out with the student at the time of suspension. And if I may address, I'll start with you, Ms. Sawyer, the comments that you made, and then I'd like to address Dr. Jones' concern. So a review of any suspension, as you know, a student has to be short-term suspended before they can be long-term suspended. So even a student who brings a gun or explosive device, there has to be a short-term suspension before they can proceed with the long-term suspension. So that's an example of why a principal would not want to wait, or I think the board would not want to wait for a review until that suspension could be implemented. So from a due process standpoint, the short-term suspension always has to happen first. And upon the request of the parent, the reason the superintendent and staff thought that was important, part of what Mr. Strang said, that parents do need the choice. Some parents, and Dr. Barnes and Mr. Coles can speak to that, from DTMs, parents say that you know, this suspension was appropriate for the behavior. We don't have an objection to the consequence that the student received because of the behavior. So parents should have involvement in, you know, how, to some degree, how they want their child to be sanctioned. To Dr. Jones's point regarding the postponement, in addition to the change in PowerSchool that would say that the student was not suspended, and the recovery, that's also an opportunity for the school to recognize and to document that the interventions that you mentioned did not take place and need to take place. So then that gives the school the opportunity to go back and say, okay, we suspended this kid, or this kid was suspended for 5 days, but we never offered this child counseling. We never offered this child a program. We didn't get them in to see the counselor. And so the next time a behavior comes up, then you won't have that automatic suspension, because you will have that noted there as well, that these other things need to take place. So in addition to the changing of the record, it also gives the opportunity for the school to put those other measures in place. And those are outlined in the Student Code of Conduct. The Student Code of Conduct is clear that the school is supposed to do a measured consequence for a student, including letters, conferences, in-school suspension. And yes, that doesn't always happen.
Yes.
And that's one of the things that this policy is meant to start to correct, to say the board is putting the schools on notice that we want, as from your language, Dr. Jones, in line 12 and 13, consistency and uniformity in short-term suspensions across the district. So that begins the process in helping the schools recognize the board is saying, be on notice that this is what you need to do.
Okay. I think we need to move on unless there's some overwhelming comment that's
Yeah,
just can't stay,
If I could,
okay.
with respect, I think we need to tackle the big rock.
Yeah, I was getting ready to say, it's, so Madam Chair, we are 92 minutes
I
in.
know.
And so if the committee, I guess I would ask a question, does the committee want to wrap up its work today? Or would it like to have a second bite at the apple in November?
To me, I would ask the question first, do you have clarity in all that we've discussed in terms of tweaking, and making changes up through?
All the changes that y'all have suggested, Ms. Kelly has written down and has incorporated into a new version of the document, with the sole exception of Ms. Shipp's language, which we will get to her, which we will get momentarily.
Yes, because
I don't believe that would be the hang-up. The hang-up, frankly, I think, is now y'all need to have a conversation on the big rock, which is, A, do you want to allow an appeal or review, and which do you want to allow? And then B, is it automatic, or does it have to be requested? Or maybe can it be opted out of? Or I think those are the two, frankly, heavy decisions before this committee right now, unless I'm missing something.
let's speak to that in terms of line 17 and 18. What is the thinking? Yes, let's begin with you.
I understand the challenge of having a prior review of every disciplinary action, and I'm willing to just accept the language in the draft policy with the upon request of the parent, with the caveat that I'll be looking for numbers in a year, or a year from when we return to some sense of normalcy in our schools. And if there isn't a significant decrease in disproportionality in how infractions are handled, then I think we need to come back, reopen the policy, and take stronger measures. Then I think that's the next step, is to figure out where we need to to work on the disproportionality. And I'm comfortable with the changes in the policy as they stand, with the caveat of seeing the changes to lines 35, 36. And as long as that language specifically asks schools to come up with a plan for addressing the disproportionality in disciplinary actions, I'm comfortable with where we stand.
All right,
I'll just say with number 17, one of the things that I think would help, and that was done, should be done here, is when you say upon request of the principal,
parent.
Parent. After a child was consequences, going to be a suspension, one of the steps was to make sure parents is called, parents have a clear understanding of why the suspension is being made, and provided with the process. If there is a concern about the suspension, you have the right to appeal. And appeal letters were in the student rights and responsibility handbooks at one time, probably online now, and or one will be sent with the disciplinary suspension letter. So I think that helps when you're saying, should the parent have to request it, or will the parent know they can do this? I think if that is part of the suspension process, then the parent knows right up front they have the right, if they're not happy with the decision, I would say that to the parent, you have the right to appeal. Here's
In
how
the
you can
notification
find-
letter, the notification letter
Right.
would include.
So I think that may help with that number 17. Line 17.
So how specifically, what are you recommending in terms of changing the language upon request of the parent?
I don't think she's.
I'm saying that should be, I guess that would be in part of the review process.
And I guess I'm asking that question too because of many parents' lack of empowerment about being able to do so. There's overwhelmingly disproportionality in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, but it's nationwide. I think I read somewhere 3 million students suspended, and quite frankly, and maybe I need to ask staff this, a lot of times students, Ruby Jones is suspended 3 days here, 3 days later, a month or so, 3 days, to the point of these short-term suspensions being collectively a big chunk out of the child's educational school year. Am I off on that? Multiple short terms?
I would just say that means.
I'm asking
Okay,
staff, please.
So if I could respond, if I understand your question, as far as multiple short-term suspensions. So with this policy, what we're looking to address is the fact of looking at multiple short-term suspensions. So oftentimes, if a student is given a 10-day suspension, the school is more least likely to repeat that 10-day suspension pattern if there's a process in place. And so this process puts the school on notice that we're looking and we're advocating for our kids. So that's what this process is for. There are times that there's not going to be the opportunity to review a suspension if it's egregious enough that student has to go and be suspended immediately. So this puts our schools on notice that something else needs to be done, and it gives students and parents the empowerment to have their suspensions looked at and not just say, okay, well, your child is suspended and it's done.
Well, that's what I was hoping in the lines that I had placed in there, because that was my grave concern. Okay. Okay.
Dr. Jones, that was my question too to them. I was gonna ask, is that process being looked at closely? Because we sent those to Learning Communities, SUPS, into their office. So their office could begin to look at that for a school. And is it too many suspensions being done for one particular student? I guess that would be support too. That's why that documentation is to be sent in. So my number of suspensions can be questioned. Actually, quarterly, we would look at the number of suspensions to question if these are appropriate suspensions coming from your school and the proportionality of suspensions.
So to speak to that,
No, go ahead.
so to speak to that, that's a large bit of the work of our community administrators, of which Ms. Demetria Williams is one. We have 6 that, depending on the learning community, some do on a weekly basis, some do on a monthly basis, some do bi-weekly, some do, like you said, quarterly. But we do know we have a review when Ms. Julia Booth, our data manager, sends out verifications from PowerSchool to say, here are your suspension numbers, here are your numbers in PowerSchool. Make sure you and your principal review those. Make sure that these numbers that we're sending out that we see match up with the numbers that you have at the school. Have your principal sign that and return that to the office to make sure that that data is verified. So the review has to take place, quote, and I use review, quote unquote, but the review is, there's a process in place that, hey, we send this to your school to say, these are the numbers that we have in PowerSchool in the ways of discipline numbers. Review them, have your principal sign, and send it, and then as they come in, we check that off in the Office of Student Discipline Behavior Support to say, these schools have turned it in, these schools have not. Hey, school, and then we copy our community administrators on it to say, hey, you have 5 or 6 schools in your learning community that haven't turned in this report yet. But that's the official report, but our community administrators, they review that data as often as their learning community superintendent allows them to and brings that information to them. And again, some of it is weekly in their weekly meetings with learning communities. Some of it is bi-weekly when it comes down to learning community principals meetings, but definitely quarterly.
Okay.
And as a staff perspective, that process is one that we are refining and we're increasing accountability on, such that it would be more consistent across all learning communities, because the data will show that it is inconsistent, and we recognize
Yeah.
that.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I think to Mr. Jeter's concern about the time, I think if we can get this done now, I don't see meeting again to go through this.
Totally up to you, Madam Chair.
But we will need to consider, what time is it now?
Madam Chair, it is 11:15.
Okay.
My next meeting's at
11:30.
11:30.
Okay, all right.
Do we have the language from Ms. Shipp?
I don't think we're done yet.
Well,
Can we answer the big rock?
Okay.
We're
Absolutely.
going with appeals, right? I think Ms. Sawyer agreed the language in line 17, which makes this an appeal as opposed to a mandatory review. And we never talked about lines 4 and 5 on page 2. Maybe I missed it. I don't
no,
think
we were
did.
getting, that's where we were trying to get to that.
All right, let's get to it. Because, guys, I appreciate that you've got till 8 o'clock, and maybe everybody else does as well. I don't. So we've already run over. On lines 4 and 5, in the first instance, I look at line 5, and I think that term should be consistent with that which was in lines 13 and 14 on page 1, which is consistency and uniformity is what we seek here. But secondly, I do question the need for lines 4 and 5, or that statement, given the fact that I again ask, do we need to add this to every policy? I understand that this is a very important policy. All of our policies are important policies. There are annual training and development that all PD required for all of our staff. And so I do wonder the value of 4 and 5 in terms of this particular policy.
I put it
calling this
there,
out.
and I'm strongly for it if I have to tap dance from one end of this dais to the other.
Can you make the case then?
Yes, I make the case,
tap dancing
because
stuff.
it is a problem nationwide, locally, and if you don't address it through the appropriate training for administrative staff, you are not going to have this consistency that we've been talking about, and uniformity, and I think
And-
suspensions will continue to be arbitrary and capricious.
Madam Chair,
as
I
I've
understand that.
experienced.
My question comes from a position of saying, are we gonna trust but verify? Or are we gonna distrust and verify? You know,
Whichever, it doesn't matter, just so that language, that sentence stays in.
I thought it was the tap dancing that was gonna get the sentence in
Dr.
there.
Jones and Mr. Strain, I just have a consideration for the board's review. To Mr. Strain's point, if the sentence is changed to a minimum annual training / development for all administrative staff to ensure consistency and uniformity, as Mr. Strain said, that's consistent with lines 13 and 14. It is redundant, but it sort of wraps up the point that the reason that we are doing the annual training is to go back to what we said in the first paragraph, to ensure consistency and uniformity across the districts.
In disciplinary standards.
Disciplinary standards across the district.
And it had been a requirement in the past. I don't know that it can, I read that it was no longer a required. We used to be required to have training every year on the rights and responsibility handbook and how we would follow
Okay,
procedures.
so we
Ms.
can
Shipp,
have
you are
that
correct.
discussion.
Ms. Shipp, you are correct in that it used to be mandatory, but it is no longer mandatory. It's
Right, that's-
optional, and so
right.
that's the reason why that sentence is there.
Right, that's what I
So
was
that
saying.
it would go back to being mandatory.
So we need to focus on what needs to be, because the fact of the matter is that suspensions locally, CMS is in the nation, are out of control. So any,
I got it.
any.
I thought I was gonna get you to tap dance, but.
Okay, all right.
I'm comfortable with the revised language, with the consistency and uniformity in a disciplinary standards
I like that.
language.
Across the district.
Yes,
I agree. Do you
I
agree?
agree.
Sure. Yep.
Right.
Did you get that,
Okay.
Yvette?
All right, do we have time to go through the,
Madam Chair, the other Madam Chair wishes to address the body.
okay, thank you.
So this is something that I wanted to say at the start of the meeting. And, you know, Mr. Strain rightly points out that whenever we tackle a policy, it's good to define what is the problem we're trying to solve. And I think there's an overarching problem here that that is bigger than this policy that we need to address, separate from this policy. We can't force this policy to address the bigger problem, and we need to pay attention to that bigger problem. And I think that bigger problem is the disproportionality in our discipline. And we know that disproportionality really shows up where there is discretion, where there's principal discretion, right? And you talk about arbitrary and capricious, Dr. Jones. And to address that, that's a preventive problem. A policy on suspensions, you're already at the suspension level. You can't like shoehorn the solution into that. It's a separate problem. So that's going to be about principal training, principal expectations, principal accountability. That's where we're talking about bias training. And so that's a separate, it's a related issue, it's an overarching issue, but I think you could get bogged down in this policy trying to solve that issue. So probably it's good to keep this focused on the process for reviews and appeals of short-term suspensions, and we need to tackle this bigger problem.
Appreciate that. So I don't know, Madam Chair, is it possible in 11 minutes to print a clean version of this, or to send us a clean version of it, to look at it on the screen or whatever, so that we've got a clean version that we can rip through real quick and vote on?
I do believe so.
Yeah, I mean, it's gonna take us, just a few minutes to get it printed.
Or we can look at it on the screen.
Yeah, we could do that too.
So are we fine with, oh, that's the regulations there, so.
Charlie, do you know if it's possible to put it up on these Wii screens here? Or maybe we'll just go have a look up here. I don't know.
I do
Bishop,
not
did you
know if it's
rewrite?
possible.
Yeah, she's typing it. I think she's trying to type it in.
I don't think so, Dr. Jones.
What I said. I do think that's true. It's a bigger problem than the policy. She needs.
Who made the changes on page 2 and 4?
To number 4, I do, I have that.
Make sure we have this right.
I like that change.
Yeah, that
It's,
was-
it's more specific and concrete.
And it is across the, consistency across the district.
Yeah. Consistency and uniformity and disciplinary standards, I think is the language that
Yeah, I'm not
I
sure.
wrote.
I just marked.
Is
it.
that what you had as well?
Yeah, it was staff to develop, consistency and uniformity across the district.
Was it
Where is this being
consistency
shown?
and uniformity and disciplinary standards?
All of
Is
you
that-
have your email and your laptops, except for Dr. Jones.
Well,
I
can-
do.
I can put it right here.
Well, I can give you Andre's and you can read it on that one. So we will, as soon as we get it typed up, we will email it to y'all.
Oh, she's gonna email.
Yeah, so we just gotta make sure the verbiage is correct.
You know, this is a much bigger problem than the policy.
Yep.
Yes, ma'am.
So are we okay with the regulation? We didn't make any changes to the regulation?
It's not ours to change.
Oh, right, that's the.
Where is that?
super-
On the regulations?
You need me,
Mm-mm.
I figured y'all would.
The regulations is not, mm-mm.
They need clarity on your, verbiage. You can't read Bishop's handwriting.
Uh-oh, okay.
The same with mine if I sent it, so.
You sending it to email?
As soon as they are done.
Okay.
We will email it to you and be ready to go immediately.
So Charles,
Yes, ma'am.
are there polls you, I mean, I've become a 538 obsessive. Which,
How's it look?
better every day.
Oh, yeah, it does.
At 11 a.m.
But it's one. Yeah, I think mine was big.
I hope you're right.
On the Senate?
Oh, why didn't it go? we go. No, it's not doing it. It's being weird.
I knew this would be a tough one.
She just sent it, she just emailed it to all the members, so we were waiting for that to print it out, but we don't have, but she just emailed it to everyone's email and to Andre's, because Dr. Jones has.
And it came through.
I have mine.
Oh, you have yours?
Oh, you do?
Okay, and it came through to me.
Take Ms. Mays' computer from you? Charles?
Huh?
All right, so everybody has the updated language in an email.
Except we forgot to take out line 12.
Oh, she didn't take out line 12, so just go ahead and mark that out.
Yeah,
The one that starts, Nicole, with "A student may petition the board for
yeah,
appeal."
that was supposed to be gone.
Yeah, just remove that.
Was that in the paragraph from?
It's number 7, it's on line 7, it's in the first paragraph, then next to the last sentence.
A student may petition.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
wasn't
that doesn't
taken
make
out.
sense, and the line numbers aren't showing.
It's on line 11.
But she's not looking at the line version.
We don't have lines.
Did you find it?
We left in the student may petition the board for an appeal on this.
All right, coming through again. Sorry, hold on.
Are you resending it, Nicole?
Okay, I haven't gotten it the second
Yeah,
time.
Lenora, those sentences don't right now make sense.
Well, they helped me put it, let's see what we
Sentences, Ms.
said.
Sawyer?
What used to be line 35, 36,
Each school, I took that straight from, let's see, the first part.
something is
Every
confusing.
school shall articulate in its school improvement plan a clear and measurable goal for safety and supervision that develops a school discipline plan process.
That doesn't-
Using the student rights and responsibility handbook, that should have been a period there.
Something's not,
Yeah, that's not exactly the way I did it.
You want me to change that before I send it?
Say,
Okay.
yeah, using the student rights and responsibility handbook. No, and it's not, I didn't use the word "and looks for," no, it should be. No, what is it? You have the paper, it's not. Using the student rights and responsibility handbook.
Okay.
For, take out, for appropriate consequences.
Yep.
Take out "and looks," it just, it uses the student rights and responsibilities handbook for appropriate consequences.
Thank you.
Yeah, take out "and looks," okay, "and looks for."
Madam Chair, as I'm driving this timeline for 11:30, I'm going to step out and take my 11:30 call. I think we're there or thereabouts. There's some wordsmithing going on. I think the spirit of what we've created is right,
Exactly.
and so I'll certainly support this. Thank you.
Thank you.
In order to decrease referrals, eliminating the number of racially disproportionate, the number of racially, I think that word is right, the number of racially disproportionalities of suspensions. Carol, take a look at it, because that was, I was trying to pull your language about when it,
okay.
You just sent another one.
Okay, hang on, let me get to that one. Why can't we just cut everything except from between every school shall articulate in its school improvement plan a clear and measurable goal for eliminating the number of racially disproportionate suspensions.
I don't think we had.
But but you were trying to say, because there's a lot of stuff here that I combine what we had about every school should keep a log, rather than saying keep a log, say do a school discipline plan process. So what I was trying to do is take all of those sentences all the way to the second page. And
And-
The log is still there.
But the
Yeah.
sentence is a paragraph, and it's confusing as heck to me.
yeah, you need to, it doesn't need to be a.
Dr. Jones, can you read it out loud and to let us know where, so we can hear where? the
Every
confusion is?
school shall articulate in its school improvement plan a clear and measurable goal for safety and supervision that develops a school discipline plan process using the school rights and responsibility for appropriate consequences
Yeah,
in order
it's a
to decrease
run-on.
referrals, eliminating the number of racially disproportionality of suspensions.
And that's a run-on. It
Teacher
wasn't-
standpoint, I am
Yeah,
cross-eyed.
How about
Yeah, there's
every
too many
school,
words.
it's the sentences are not right.
how
I didn't
about
write it.
every school shall articulate in its school improvement plan?
Louder, start again louder, please.
Okay. Every school shall articulate in its school improvement plan a clear and measurable goal to eliminate racial disparity in suspensions.
I don't
School
want to.
shall,
I'm sorry, I don't want to start a debate again, especially since Mr. Strain is here, but I don't think that we use that term, racially
approved.
disproportionate, as part of the discussion. I thought we only said disproportionality. And I don't know if that changes the conversation or not. I just wanted to put it on the table, that we had
okay,
not
well, we
used
could
that
use
term.
disproportionate. Are we asking them to have a goal, or are we asking them to develop a school discipline plan?
Well,
I
you
mean,
asked them to use a goal, talking about the school improvement plan, and I was saying the safety and supervision is the goal that you would be looking for under school improvement plan. That would address,
See, I don't think we need to go into that detail that it's the safety and supervision part of the plan. I just think we need to
so
say.
do you
that-
want to take this part out that Dr. Jones wrote, where she was trying to say every school should have a student log of behaviors that result in, she was given some form of intervention or plans, so that's where that came from.
They've changed it 3 times since.
Right. That's what I was looking
More
at,
about
how
it.
to,
Thank you, though.
how to eliminate or putting that piece in, because we didn't say we would totally not have something talking about interventions, which is what was written here. Every school shall keep a student log of behaviors that result in short-term suspensions, which include but is not limited to the description of the frequency and intensity of offenses and of behaviors. That's the school discipline plan. That's the safety and supervision school discipline plan that you should be following to reduce the number of referrals that come to the office.
Is the
Are we
school-
trying to fix the content or the grammar?
That's right.
Both. Is the school discipline plan part of the school improvement plan, or is that a
Yes,
separate
yes.
document?
Yes, it is the part of the school improvement plan that would measure those goals for suspensions.
okay.
So each school improvement plan has a safety and supervision part of their school improvement plan.
Okay. I don't think we need to tell people which part it needs to live in, because I think it just confuses
No,
the issue in the
I mean,
policy.
it doesn't have to be. I was trying to find a way to take what Dr. Jones had put here, talking about a log. All of that is part of your discipline plan.
How about if it says, every school shall articulate in its school improvement plan a clear and measurable goal to eliminate disproportionate suspensions? The plan shall, and then.
Include, yes.
Include.
Okay.
So are you basically combining 35 and 36?
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
35 and 36 with 38 and 39?
That's what I
Yes,
was trying to
yes.
do, exactly. I was trying to combine all of
And
those,
the
saying
plan
what
shall include,
a school discipline plan.
and whatever that needs to
Right.
be.
Right. And that's what I was going to say. Let's go back and say the plan shall include.
Descriptions, frequency,
Well,
See, I took that out.
anytime we look at behavioral concerns, we look at frequency, intensity, and duration. That's just
Right,
a whole part
right.
of the.
Well, I just copied that.
I was gonna say, when
So the
I
plan shall
rewrote this,
include
I
dis-
took that out, Dr. Johnson. I think Sean was saying, could that just be one big piece, or did we want to give them all the terms?
So let's get back to what every school shall articulate in the school a clear.
Okay, here's what I originally wrote. Let me see if I can read it. Every school shall articulate in a school improvement plan a clear and measurable goal to, if you want to put that first, to eliminate the disproportionality of suspensions. It should include a school safety and supervision plan that utilizes the rights and responsibilities of the handbook for consequences. I mean, that's pretty much, and those, if you want to go on and say what those consequences should be, I mean, are you going then into keeping a log of behavior, short-term suspensions to eliminate the frequency and duration? So now you're saying what it should look like. I felt like if you say you have to have a plan and it follows the school rights and responsibility handbook, that's in the student rights and responsibility handbook.
I would be comfortable with it just saying that first sentence. Every school shall articulate in its school improvement plan a clear and measurable goal to eliminate disproportionate suspensions, and let them figure it out. I mean, to me, that's the goal. That's what we're asking for, and anything beyond that is us.
Dr. Jones, are you good with that sentence?
Yeah, because
It's
see,
Chip, are you good with that
I
sentence?
agree, I agree.
Melissa, can you
Let's
write
just
that
say yes.
sentence?
Yes, yes.
I'm fine, to eliminate the number of disproportionality of suspensions and take out, they can figure out how to do
So we're gonna save and email this to y'all right now so y'all can look at it.
Okay,
And
so
make
we've
sure-
taken that,
everything out, the second
The
paragraph.
log is gone too.
The log is gone too?
why is the law gone?
That's what I was trying to say, do you want to keep that in there or not?
It should be, if we want any accountability measure.
Then that's part of, then you need a statement saying, that's part of the school
And if we are
improvement
going
plan.
to, if we really want to get serious about looking at suspensions and disproportionality.
Is there any problem with having the sentence as just stated and leaving the section that says every school shall keep a student log, blah, 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 blah?
I'm cool with that.
Are you good with leaving that one sentence, leaving that paragraph in? Is everybody good with that?
I'm good with that.
That's what it says. So
And,
right,
and Mr. Strain indicated he was fine with it.
yes, he said he was fine with that.
Y'all good with that?
Which
Dr.
one?
Barnes?
He had said take that. No, what-
All right, so we're gonna save it and email it to y'all. If, Dr. Barnes, if you wanna come read it to make sure y'all, staff is comfortable with this.
Yeah, they had looked at it, that's who was looking at it. Yeah, they were looking at that too.
Yeah, I mean, it's the language that was there before.
Okay,
I think they were trying to summarize.
so do you all feel comfortable with all that we've said? Is there any clarification, any more clarity that you need to?
We do not need any more.
Okay, oh, all right.
Thank you,
Well, with
Dr.
that
Barnes. That's the best
said,
thing I've heard all day.
if there are not any
I
other
move the-
pertinent discussion to this, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Madam
no,
Chair,
I move
Madam Chair,
approval.
before we need to get this in front of you, y'all need to vote it out,
Oh, okay.
and then we can adjourn.
We need to
Yeah, I
see it.
move- Yeah.
Okay.
Technically, it's up to y'all, I mean,
We
you
need
don't
to
have
see
to
it.
see it, you can approve it, we can tell you what you approved after the
I'll start the
fact.
process while she's emailing.
Yeah.
I move approval of policy JKD as edited.
I second the motion.
So,
And we should have that in our inbox right now.
it is gonna be, if you could, just for posterity's sake, Ms. Sawyer, make the motion, that you are making a motion to approve the version that was emailed to you by Ms. Kelly at 11:38.
So moved. So move to approve the draft policy JKD as emailed by Ms. Kelly at 11:38.
Hold on, did you just send us a new one?
No.
Okay. Is there a second?
Oh, okay.
There's some typos there.
Per standard, any grammatical, non-substantive changes
Can be
we'll
correct.
fix
Okay.
upon approval of the chair.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have a motion. We do
We have
not have a
motion.
second yet,
I
Miss
hadn't heard a
Madam Chair.
second.
Oh, I second.
Okay.
We do have a motion and a
Favor?
second. You do need to ask for a discussion if they are allowed to discuss the motion if they want to. I will remind them they don't have to.
I have no further discussion.
Any
I
further?
have no further discussion.
And no pertinent items.
So you'll need to call the
all in
question, Madam
favor?
Chair.
Aye.
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 Okay.
Ms. Clerk, that's a 3-0 vote, recorded 3-0 with Mr. Strain has exited the meeting. So this will be a public hearing theoretically, it should be at our next meeting. But that's going to have a conversation with the chair, because if we do it at our next meeting, it will be a public hearing, which means we will go to full Zoom. We will figure that out, and Chair, Vice Chair,
Okay.
the process, it will be on a upcoming meeting.
Motion, we do it.
So with that, a motion to adjourn would be in order.
Move
if
to
there's-
adjourn.
Since there's no other business for the committee, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Adjourn.
All in
Second.
favor?
Aye.
Madam Clerk, that's a
We are
3-0
adj-
vote.
Thank you.
We are adjourned.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Dr. Barnes.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you
Barnes.
all. Thank
Thank
you all
you.
so
You all did a
much.
fabulous job.
Y'all were so
Thank you.
good, so detailed.
Thank you, Melissa.
Appreciate
Girl, I'm so hungry, I might just
it. Thank you all
have a
so
chunk of
much.
that. Go for it.
Thank you.
Oh, gosh.
That's what he just said. Yeah. So it may not.
Melissa, take your starter home.
Normally we do them on the first meeting of the month.
Okay.
And since we just had.
Thank you. We'll keep, I'm gonna keep beating on the alternative measures, documenting
And
them.
is it practical? You got policy, does the policy help inform practice? That's the important thing.
All right, this was, thank you. You guys have a good one. You too. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Barnes. All right.
Are y'all all, is everybody staying, everybody leaving from this building?
I'm going back upstairs.
Okay, I have something to bring up. I did a little thank you, I was doing thank you speeches, so I have a little something to say thank you to you all.
Dr. Jones, you want me to take your cushion back upstairs?
Yeah, yes, I would appreciate it. That way I will not be going back upstairs. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't have a real need to do that. In fact, I need to,
So we'll see you again in the morning. We have hearings in the morning. It's only one.
but I didn't get anything.
Right, because they didn't get the reassignment.
Senator Harris will be downtown tomorrow afternoon from 1 to 7, so the roads will be blocked off some downtown.
Huh? What did you say?
Senator Harris, Kamala Harris, will be here tomorrow from 1 to 7, and so especially right around 1 to 2, and then around 4 to 6, some roads are going to be blocked off downtown. So if you're downtown,
So the hearing is at what time, 9:30?
9:30. And
What
it's
time?
only one, so we should finish early.
Is at what time?
9:30.
Oh, okay, okay,
And there's only one.
It's
okay,
only one.
okay,
We should finish by 10, I'm
okay.
hoping.
And reason.
So we don't have anything to give.
Can I have your hammer time?
Because the parent didn't submit anything, because she requested a reassignment.
Is she coming?
So
Have you
far,
checked? Okay,
we'll know if, we'll try to call you as soon as possible if she decide not to,
okay.
because she never did send anything over.
Thank you for your work.
You're welcome. Yeah, hope so. So we'll see. It was, I sent a, email, I think yesterday during board meeting.
Okay.
And it's just a letter, that we sent to the parent to request.
Okay, okay.
And there's a brief, like a small paragraph about what he did. It was a gun charge.
Okay, okay. So I'm going home to meet my spectrum person to get my